And I went to him and said we were here to look for any of our people. And he started to cry. And I said, but what did I say? And he said, so we walked out the back door of his office and walked over to a hill. And walked up that hill, and then on the other side was row after row of crosses. And I said, what is this? And he said, this is all American soldiers. How do you look at that and not know you got to change? I was sitting in the senior class in high school in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, which is a suburb of Akron. And our whole group wanted to call the enlisting office and have them come out so we could sign up and go. And we had to face the fact we weren't old enough. You know, I was just 17. I originally picked the Navy. They were offering schooling for flying, and that was very appealing to me. And so I passed the entrance exam, and then I took the physical, and I passed that, and I was getting ready to leave, and one of the young men said, oh, wait a minute, I forgot something. And I went over and sat down, and they did the eye exam, and I'm partially colorblind. Wiped me out. And said, well, I'll show them. And I went and enlisted in the Army and had fun with them. Boot camp offered you an order to do this and this and this and this every day. The orders for today are not the same as the orders for the next day, but they're all orders to you, and you do what you're told. And when it's done, your body is a lot stronger and a lot more useful than it was. I learned some things about my body I hadn't known before. But it taught me a good bit, and I really did work at what they were offering, and it was very helpful. I dropped about 40 pounds and built a couple of muscles I didn't know I had, and they were all useful.
On December 24th, 1996, two ships, the SS Leopoldville and the Cheshire, sailed across the English Channel carrying the 66th Infantry with them. After the loss of troops at the Battle of the Bulge, time was of the essence, so the ships were hastily loaded and sent across to reinforce the depleted lines.
They had set up a plan for us to go into Upper France, where the main war was taking place.
The Leopoldville was a passenger ship that spanned over 478 feet and had a beam 62 feet tall and could carry over 5,000 troops. As the ship neared its destination of Cherbourg, France, it was struck by a torpedo from a German U-boat.
We went across the channel to France, and on the way we got nailed by two submarines. instead of being grouped together the way we were, which was an easy mark for the torpedoes, we scattered. And we lost a little over 3,000 of our division troops. Some of them just got knocked overboard, but some of them also got killed with the explosions. We would take all of the lifeboats and put our own people in them and drop them in the water, and we would oar over to the boat, the two ships that had been hit, and take on people from them and take them back to our ship, and then we could get everybody into land.
It took over an hour for Cherbourg to learn of the Leopoldville sinking, but by then it was too late. When help from Cherbourg had arrived, most had either frozen to death or drowned. After the war, the 66th was ordered at discharge not to talk about the sinking of the SS Leopoldville to the press, and told that their GI benefits as a civilian would be canceled if they had done so. When all was said and done, over 700 troops had died from hypothermia, drowning, or the torpedo explosion. The destruction of the SS Leopoldville will go down as the second largest loss of life by sinking ship in the entire European theater.
Headquarters people decided that it would be better to put us over on the place we went and take their troops. And so they pulled us aside and brought us into a place near Loyang-Saint-Nazaire, where they had backed up a bunch of Germans into what then was sub-pens. And we had to hold the Germans in there. And we found out that there was over 90,000 Germans in there. You know, we had under 30,000 in our division, and a lot less than that on two different French groups. But fortunately for us, we held them where they were, and while they outnumbered us about 2-to-1, they were waiting for their comrades to come out of Germany into France and come close enough that then they could come together. And our troops went so well against the Germans coming out, they couldn't make it. And so the people here where we were couldn't make it either. We would send out squads searching for what was there and what wasn't there. And when we would find something, we would jot that down and we would go back and hand it off to the head of the artilleries. And they would decide when they would drop a few pieces on that. There was not a lot of heavy artillery shelling going on. Just letting each other know we've got these big guns, now don't mess around or we'll send more of them. So in one sense we played games with each other. The other part of it is you don't listen to exploding artillery shells right where you are and not take it all very serious. We were across what we used to call the line, which separated them and us, which was imaginary. There was nothing real about it. We got shelled by mortars, and we just laid down and waited until they stopped, and then we got up and ran for some cover. And in a little while we got back, and all of us got back. It wasn't true for two other squads that went out the next day. They both lost, I believe it was 2 men each. And you never knew in combat what was going to happen to you. Mm. There were 4 artillery shells that landed in our area all at once. And it killed 17 of our men. And these are people I knew well. And the colonel reminded us that we had been shelling them. And when the war was over, we found some people we could talk to and asked them how our artillery had done. And they remarked that on one day, our artillery shells killed over 100 of their men. There is a better way to live, even with people you don't love. I kept wondering, why do we all keep doing this? You know, the Second World War was the 4th time the United States had been in very difficult battle. It was the thing that pushed me the toughest. How can I support the just so simple killing of literally thousands of people, not just in the armed forces, but in the people that we walked through in their homes and so forth. It just, at one point we counted outside of where we were dug in, we counted over 40 civilians that had been just mashed. And it was like, when you're not careful and more often don't care, you just throw stuff and hope it does your job. Mm-hmm. All of that hit me too hard. And so when we finally got back, we were in France, and then I think it was only 6 weeks after VE Day that I got transferred to the 42nd in Austria. The original group I had gone over with, the 66th, was canceled and split. More than half of them were put on board a ship and went through the Panama Canal headed for the Pacific. And I missed that one. So the rest of us, like I went into the 42nd and I was basically stationed in Salzburg. I was with a group. We were sent up into the mountains looking for some Germans, mostly SS troops. And we went up to find them. We lost a couple of our people doing that. They lost more than that. I did that a few times. I didn't do it all the time. I had more responsibility for looking after a prison. When I had changed the guard from afternoon to evening, and I had been thinking about this for a good while, and so I decided to go visit the officers of the whole group, and I knew where they were, and so I went and knocked on the door, And one of the men came and opened the door, and I said, I would like to speak to your commander. And so he went and asked the commander, and he said, yeah, sure. So I went in, and I simply told him I was concerned about him and his men, and did he have any real complaints? And he said, well, what would you do about it? I said, if you have a real complaint, I will pass it on. Well, we don't really have a good complaint. And they didn't, because we made very sure they had a good, warm, dry place to sleep and 3 meals a day. And he was aware of that and said so. So I said, well, I'll be around. If you need to pass the word on, just call me. And so about, it was almost 2 months later, he came to where I was and he said, I'd like to talk to you for a little. I said, sure. So he was telling me about him and his group and how it was getting to be time for him to go home. I said, oh, that's a good thing. He said, well, I'm going to have to work when I get home. I said, gee, what a shame. And he said, but I want to tell you that you and your men have made us feel human again. Boy, what a pat on the back. Whew. But that was our job, to make them feel human again. And I should drop the one word, you can't make people do that. You can open a door, but they have to decide. And most of them do. After the war was over in Europe. Then came home, and we came on a troop ship and started out of Germany and came back into New York. I boarded a very large ship. It was half tanker. And they brought 50 of us back home. And I liked it because I was a staff sergeant and everybody else was under that. So it was just a pleasant journey back home. Got back to New York, and I called 2 buddies of mine who lived in New York, and I knew they were home. And they told me how to get to their place in Brooklyn, and I went, spent the day, and the one's mother made a special meal for me, and the least I could do was eat it. You know. But they were very kind. And I got the train and came out to Indiana and got discharged, and I walked out of the tent where the discharge was, and there stood my dad. And we ran at each other, and what a time. So we got in his car and put my stuff in the trunk and started down the road. And I said, Dad, I'm a little thirsty. Good thought. He pulled over and stopped. We went in, and he ordered 2 bourbons from the guy behind the desk. And he said, we've never had a drink before, pal. And he handed it to me, and I said, we're going to have it now. And I remember my dad said, well, are you going to re-enlist? And I said, yeah, Dad, but not in the Army. And I didn't. And he kind of looked at me and then decided to walk away from it. And about a year and a half later, I made the decision to enter the ministry. And I thought, well, I'll have to tell him. And I went to him and I said, well, Dan, I've got to tell you something. No, you don't. Well, I'd like to. Well, I already know. What? You want to be a preacher. Now, how does Sam Hill, did he know that? You know, well, that's what a good father does. He keeps track of you and knows where you're headed and why, and if he can, he helps. And so when I came out of the war, and it was pretty miserable, I began to think about how could I help our people not do this again? And so I wound up in the Methodist Church as a pastor and spent a little over 50 years doing that until I retired. And there are people all over this world. There are some bums, but there's mostly good people. Now, they don't always use this the way you do, but they got the same body, they got the same mind, they got the same eyes, they got the same hands. How can we honor that? That includes the Germans and the Japanese and everybody else. They all have good people. And that we get in the business of killing them off is just, oh. And I did my share of it. It's just got to be a different way for all of us. So I've spent over 50 years in the ministry and trying to sell that idea. And there are many who were in the war that found a better way. And, two of my old friends, one of them lost a leg and the other one lost an arm. And they still have the largest book full of jokes I ever heard. And you know, how do you do that when you've lost a limb? Because, they tell me, there is a better way to live, even with people you don't love. And I hope you all learn it. Some absolutely wonderful people that I knew in the war. There were some wonderful people. And a few others, but you know, I don't know where they classed me, but I wasn't especially wanting to find out. But there were just wonderful people. And there's got to be a better way for us all to learn.
When I first heard of the Harlem Veteran Project, I was really interested in the class. It stood out to me from all the other classes. The prospect of making a documentary was both exciting and yet terrifying. I wasn't sure if it was going to turn out good, but I was up for the challenge. The first day of class, we got to choose our veterans. James's name really stood out to me because I was very interested in covering World War II. His story is both inspiring and heartwarming. I was never able to talk to James because he passed away before I was able to finish my doc. But I feel as though I knew him because of all the time I spent putting together this doc. If it wasn't for the program, I would never have met James or have been able to hear his story. This program is fantastic because it gives the students the chance to learn about history in a way only this program could do. I would like to thank the Harlem Veteran Project, and I would also like to thank James for everything that he's done. I hope you enjoyed this doc. Thank you.